Black night hath hid the pleasures of the day, and sheeting darkness overhangs the earth, and with the black fall of her cloudy robe obscures us from the eyesight of the world. So having finally descended into the darkness, our nostrils full of the incense kufi, and enfolded in the black crepe of hypnos, we have at last entered the realm of dreams, properly attired and scented. At this point in our journey, we may ask ourselves this age-old question: do dreams convey truths or falsehoods? In the ancient world, the answer was not so easily obtained. There is a modern assumption, especially by those who are disenchanted with the current world, to assume that dreams were always and everywhere relied upon by our ancestors, that they took them at face value and acted upon their nocturnal images in their waking reality. But of course, reality is always more complicated and nuanced than that. To begin, there were tremendous ambiguities regarding the nature of dreams. The Greeks and Romans generally held the belief in a moral cosmos, which implied a reciprocation between gods and mortals. This would mean that sometimes, however infrequently, at least a portion of dreams carried revelations and prophecies for the benefits of a people or a society. The gods, after all, care for our well-being, as we are indeed elements of the cosmos, and although fate can be cruel and harsh, as devotees we can still propitiate the gods to help us endure and suffer our fortunes and misfortunes with both fortitude and perseverance. But we cannot assume everyone took dreams as clear evidence that an action was required of them in the waking world, or that it had any real significance for that matter. Some dismissed dreams as utter nonsense. Typically, the Epicureans would doubt that gods had any concern for the world and humans at large, for since the gods are self-sufficient and self-moving, and therefore experiencing no lack or deficiency, they did not bother to meddle in the affairs of humans, or reveal themselves in nature. This philosophical view, of course, sometimes landed them with the accusation of atheism. Note that they did not, however, question the existence of the gods themselves, just simply the gods' interest in us. One of the most well-known Epicureans was Lucretius, who argued that, quote, dreams do not have a divine nature or prophetic power, but come about because of the incidence of images, idola. In a Democritean, atomistic mode, we can understand that the atoms of objects give off a simulacrum of the object perceived during the waking hours. Some simulacra emerge spontaneously as shapes and various images, and during sleep, these multiform images can mingle and combine in various ways to allow us to dream of chimerical creatures like centaurs and griffins and sphinxes, who combine two incongruent portions. Similarly, Aristotle argued that since animals also dream, human dreams are most certainly not sent by the gods. However, according to him, dreams are natural, and therefore superhuman, or daimonion. On the other side of the argument, one of our earliest historical figures who asserted that the dream and the soul are intimately associated with one another is the 5th century BC poet Pindar. In the work entitled, quote, Consolation to Apollonius, Plutarch attributes the following fragment to Pindar's thought, which deeply echoes Orphic and Pythagorean ideas. Quote, And while the body of all men is encumbered by overpowering death, a living eidolon of life yet remains, for it alone is from the gods. But it sleeps while the limbs are active, yet to the sleeping, in many dreams, it shows an interpretation of future delights and pains. A related ancient Orphic and Pythagorean idea is that the soul or psyche of the human is separable from the body. Many shamanic societies also subscribe to a similar notion, where dream visions are actual journeys of the soul when it has left the body, released from its shackles and confinement. The 5th century also saw the emergence of the Hippocratic writers, who would be the ancestors of our modern-day medical establishment. Although not exactly a homogeneous group of scientists, they did differ in their theoretical explanations. The Hippocratics generally held the belief that all psychological activity was a natural phenomenon that remained internal to the body. After all, according to them, they were made of the same material. What this fundamentally meant was that the body and the soul comprised the unity of the whole human being, and therefore could never be separated while living. This position is contrary to the assertions of the theurgists. In his commentary on Plato's Republic, Proclus says, quote, "To be able to take out the soul from the body and again to get it back and make it alive that which it had left." The idea here is that the soul can be temporarily removed from the body before death in order to ascend to the gods. What aids in this process is what he calls hoi heratikoi logoi. But let us return to the ambiguity of dream. At the end of Book 4 of the Odyssey, Athena sends the phantom of Iphthime to appear to Penelope at the gates of dream, in order to reassure her that her son Telemachus is still among the living. Iphthime reassures her that Telemachus will have a guide and therefore be protected, and so Penelope asks a second question of her, this time about her husband. Quote, "If you are indeed a god, and have listened to the voice of a god, come, tell me, I pray you, also of that man of sorrows, whether he still lives and beholds the light of the sun, or whether he is already dead and in the house of Hades." And the dim phantom answered her and said, "No, of him I shall not speak explicitly, whether he be alive or dead. It is an ill thing to speak words vain as wind." What this implies is that the messenger, or Athena herself, has chosen to withhold this particular piece of information, not conveying the entire truth, but only a portion of it. The words, quote, "I shall not speak explicitly," is a very different thing than saying, "I cannot speak explicitly." There is a distinct suggestion of a holding back of information. Later in the Odyssey in Book 19, Penelope says in lines 560 to 569, quote, "Stranger, dreams verily are baffling and unclear of meaning, and in no wise do they find fulfillment in all things for men. For two are the gates of shadowy dreams, and one is fashioned of horn and one of ivory. Those dreams that pass through the gate of sawn ivory deceive men, bringing words that find no fulfillment. But those that come forth through the gate of polished horn bring true issues to pass, when any mortal sees them." The word in the Greek meaning horn, keras, and the word kryonusi suggest the association of horn with the eye and with vision. Similarly, elephanti, or ivory, is associated a few moments later with the word elipharomai, to deceive. In this we find the association of this material with the teeth. The general picture that can be drawn here is that one is more congruent with reality, like the veritable power of the eye over the power of the teeth or speech. Perhaps something related to the common expression, quote, "seeing is believing." There is also a material dimension, in which ivory, if held by the hand, is more liable to absorb the heat emitted from the hand. It also absorbs or releases moisture with the fluctuating humidity. In this sense, it is more impressionable and passive as a material. Hence, the dreams that emerge from this gate are more malleable and more deceptive. In Porphyry's De Anthro Nympharum, there is an astrological interpretation of the two gates. Quote, "The usage of referring to these two tropics in Cancer and Capricorn as gates goes back to the theologians, while Plato speaks of two mouths. Numenius and Cronius say further that the gate of Cancer is one through which souls descend, and that of Capricorn the one through which they ascend. Note that Cancer is northerly and appropriate for descent, while Capricorn is southerly and suited for ascent." Many centuries after Homer, the Roman poet Virgil echoes this literary image in his Aeneid. Quote, "There are twin gates of sleep. One they say is called the Gate of Horn, and it offers easy passage to all true shades. The other glistens with ivory, radiant, flawless, but through it the dead send false dreams up toward the sky. Many scholars have juxtaposed the two poets Ovid and Virgil as broadly representing the former as the exiled poet who was the victim of censorship and generally considered an anti-imperial commentator, compared to Virgil, who has been seen as the official imperial poet of the Roman Empire, creating and validating the empire's myths. Strangely enough, though, in this excerpt involving the emergence from the underworld, Aeneas' father escorts them through the gate of Ivory, leading some commentators to interpret this as a subtle critique of Roman grandiosity and hubris, casting doubts perhaps on the Roman enterprise. Others have argued that Aeneas, walking through the gates of Ivory, signify his willingness to conform to the gods' will, despite his own personal uncertainties and hesitations. Scholars like William V. Harris have suggested that Virgil was rather bold in including scenes of incubation practice in the Aeneid. He suggests that belief in epiphany and prophetic dreams were waning during this period of the Roman Republic and becoming less popular due to the increasingly materialistic emphasis of the natural sciences. But of course, our ancient commentators cannot give us a good picture of what actual practice was like among the inhabitants of the city. We can only infer so much. So perhaps popular belief in incubation shrines and dream interpretation remains strong among certain populations. After all, even the Roman statesman Cicero, in his On Divination, provides 25 examples of prophetic dreams, of which 8 are in the category of epiphany dreams. Despite growing skepticism, dreams were clearly still very much on the minds of the people. In the early 5th century CE, the Roman Neoplatonist Macrobius wrote a commentary on Cicero's dream of Scipio, which was to radically influence the entire Latin West in medieval science, scholasticism, and interpretation and categorization of dreams. Although Macrobius is considered a Neoplatonist and is responsible for having transmitted Neoplatonic thought to the Latin West, it has been argued by scholars like Edward Butler that the true Neoplatonic tradition had really not been preserved in its original intention and form, moving into the Roman period. At this time, we begin to see efforts to preserve pagan traditions and authentic polytheistic thought dwindle, and with the increasing hegemony of Christianity, these thinkers begin the project of synthesizing the two metaphysical structures in conformity with a monotheistic framework. After all, it is around this time that the last school of Neoplatonism closed by Emperor Justinian, which was headed by Damascius. In his introduction to the commentary, Stahl says that, quote, as an exposition of Neoplatonism, it has been praised for its succinctness and lucidity. Although it is true that Macrobius writes very clearly when expounding Neoplatonic ideas, much of his interpretations are oversimplified and often erroneous. Macrobius took a rather loose translation of the last portion of Cicero's De Republica, and translates it in a manner that conveys his own metaphysical interests. The entire dream sequence from Cicero's work is an echo of Plato's myth of air, but he substituted the return of a man from the realm of the dead to one returning from a deep slumber. The context is that Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus the Younger is met with a dream vision after being invited as a guest in the court of Massinissa, who was a Numidian king. His grandfather by adoption, elder Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, who had conquered Hannibal in 202 BC, appears to him in this dream vision, and together with the narration of the elder Scipio, the younger Scipio's disembodied soul travels and learns many different things. The introductory sequences to this work leaves an impression of vast distances and cosmic ions of deep time. In fact, on multiple occasions there is a diminution of the mortal realm, in both size and seeming importance, suggestive of the minuteness and insignificance of the human. Chapter 6, quote, my grandfather then continued, again I see you gazing at the region and abode of mortals. If it seems as small to you as it really is, why not fix your attention upon the heavens and contemn what is mortal? Or in another passage, quote, you call the Atlantic the great sea or ocean, but you can see how small it is despite its name. Has your name or that of any Roman been able to pass beyond the Caucasus, which you see over here, or to cross the Ganges over yonder, and these civilized lands in the known quarter of the globe? But who will ever hear of your name in the remaining portions of this globe? With these excluded, you surely see what narrow confines bound your ambitions, and how long will those who praise us now continue to do so? The last remark suggests that human ambition and need for fame is but a paltry thing, in comparison to the majesty and grandeur of the vast cosmos and the unceasing sands of time that erase all memories and all glories. Quote, "Therefore, if you despair of ever returning to this region in which great and eminent men have their complete reward, how insignificant will be that human glory which can scarcely endure for a fraction of a year. But if you will look upwards and contemplate this eternal goal and abode, you will no longer give heed to the gossip of the common herd, nor look for your reward in human beings." Our intentions, directed by the dreamer's narrative, is to turn our eyes away from our merely human travails, in the sobering notion that our works will be consumed by the past, and to reorient ourselves to what is most virtuous and noble. Quote, "All their gossip is confined to the narrow bounds of the small area at which you are gazing, and is never enduring. It is overwhelmed with the passing of men and is lost in the oblivion of posterity." In chapter 8, Africanus the Elder says, quote, "Do you then make that effort and regard not yourself, but only this body as mortal? The outward form does not reveal the man, but rather the mind of each individual as his true self, not the figure that one designates by pointing a finger. Know, therefore, that you are a god, if indeed a god is that which quickens, feels, remembers, foresees, and in the same manner rules, restrains, and impels the body of which it has charge, as the supreme God rules the universe." And later in chapter 9 he says, quote, "Indeed, the souls of those who have surrendered themselves to bodily pleasures, becoming their slaves, and who in response to sensual passions have flouted the laws of gods and of men, slip out of their bodies at death and hover close to the earth, and return to this region only after long ages of torment." But what is of particular interest to us in this video is Macrobius' categorization of types of dreams. This can be found in chapter 3. He delineates between 5 main types: the enigmatic dreams, the onerosomnium, the prophetic visions, horama visio, oracular dreams, crematismos oraculum, nightmares, enupnium, insomnium, and apparitional dreams, phantasma or visum. Apparently, according to Macrobius, it is not important to interpret apparitional dreams or nightmares, since their causes are mainly a result from mental or physical distress. This is a very strange notion for us, considering that nightmares and other strange dreams provoked by anxious thoughts and ruminations are often the main reason why most people in the contemporary world are interested in dream analysis. One of the main uses of dream analysis in the ancient world, however, were for the purposes of oineromancy, using dream interpretation to foretell the future. In fact, the oldest known dream book is known as the Ramesside Dream Book, dated to the 13th century BCE. Oineromancy and dream books were also popular in Babylon in the 7th century BC, and a specific role was typically granted to an individual knowledgeable in either interpreting the signs sent by the gods, or had more of a direct and inspired vision. The interpreter was referred to as oineropolos. The problem, therefore, is not whether dreams are true or false, but in the archaic world they would have been seen as revelatory enigmas, meant to be interpreted in the correct manner to reveal their hidden meaning. We have at last arrived at the notion of dream analysis and interpretation. In Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, we see that it is in fact this Titan who establishes the art and science of divination, in effect forging a communicating channel between gods and men. Quote, "I defined ways many of divination, also dreams I first did spell, discerning which foreshadowed matter of truth. I made men understand inapprehensible voices, ominous conjunctions by the way, the curious flight of those crook-footed tribes of the air. All this I bodied forth exactly, which be birds of nature favorable, which malign, how each is wont to fare, and mutually what hates they have, what leagues and fellowship. The interpretation of dreams has always been of immense interest, even to the rationalist materialist Hippocratic writers, who dedicate the fourth book of On Regimen exclusively to such interpretation. I would be remiss in making a video about dreams in the ancient world without mentioning the immensely popular Critica, the interpretation of dreams by Artemidorus in the 2nd century AD. I don't intend to get into the details, but to make an overall observation, that for Artemidorus his main concern was not in recounting examples of dream instances, but only that he is interested in the topology of dreams and the various elements that manifest in them. In a sense, this is an encyclopedia of dream images. He was very clear that he was not interested in formulating a philosophical theory, but only in interpretation. Here he says in his own words, quote, "I do not, like Aristotle, inquire as to whether the cause of our dreaming is outside of us and comes from the gods, or whether it is motivated by something within, which disposes the soul in a certain way and causes a natural event to happen to it. Rather, I use the word in the same way that we customarily call all unforeseen things God-sent." When I mention the Critica as an encyclopedic work, I do not wish it to be assumed that we can simply go through the pages, look something up, and lazily apply it to our dream analysis. Artemidorus himself says, quote, "If it is profitable, indeed, not only profitable but necessary, for the dream interpreter know the dreamer's identity, occupation, birth, financial status, state of health, and age." This will be echoed by Carl Gustav Jung many hundreds of years later, when he emphasizes the importance of the individuality and particularity of the dream analysis to the dreamer. In the year 1900, we had another book entitled The Interpretation of Dreams, this time by the Austrian neurologist and founder of psychoanalytic theory Sigmund Freud. His entire theory, and those theories that followed it, are premised on the notion that dreams have meaning. He differentiates between the outward appearance of the dream, which he terms its manifest content, and what is hidden from view, the real meaning, what is termed the latent content. Freud took a rather dismissive view of the manifold content, referring to it as the, quote, facade of the dream, in his eagerness to delve into its real meaning. But C.G. Jung takes a rather different approach, one that is more phenomenological. Because for Jung, the face or facade of the dream is just as important in analysis as its hidden contents. The dream arrives as a whole. Quote, "Like the doctor, they want to get behind the dream at once, in the false belief that the dream is a mere facade concealing the true meaning. But the so-called facade of most houses is by no means a fake or a deceptive distortion. On the contrary, it follows the plan of the building and often betrays the interior arrangement. The, quote, manifest dream picture is the dream itself and contains the whole meaning of the dream. What Freud calls the dream facade is the dream's obscurity, and this is really only a projection of our own lack of understanding. We say that the dream has a false front only because we fail to see into it. We would do better to say that we are dealing with something like a text that is unintelligible, not because it has a face, a text has no facade, but simply because we cannot read it. We do not have to get behind such a text, but must first learn to read it. Unfortunately for Freud, he insisted too heavily on the notion that all dreams are simply repressed will and desires. There is an element of truth here, however, in the sense that the soul is always striving, yearning, and desiring, and that, to quote Jung, our life spent struggling to realize our wishes and our actions proceed from the wish that something should or shouldn't come to pass. But where Carl Gustav Jung fundamentally disagreed with his mentor was that dreams are much more besides. He begins with a concession, quote, "There are, it is true, dreams which manifestly represent wishes or fears, but what about all the other things? Dreams may contain ineluctable truths, philosophical pronouncements, illusions, wild fantasies, memories, plans, anticipations, irrational experiences, even telepathic visions, and heaven knows what besides. Not only do dreams convey these various functions, but also provide the clue for the correct path in treatment." In another section of his essay on, quote, the practical use of dream analysis, Jung suggests that, quote, our present mental state depends upon our history, and therefore dream is highly personal and individual. In this regard, he would be in agreement with Artemidorus, that you cannot simply go through a dictionary of dream interpretations and apply it to your own dream. After all, a wash basin may signify something very particular for a specific person than simply a preconceived notion of cleanliness and hygiene. Regarding the somewhat multiform and chaotic nature of certain dream images, Jung says, quote, "Often enough they appear senseless, but it is obviously we who lack the sense and ingenuity to read the enigmatic message from the nocturnal realm of the psyche." What Jung is evoking here is the wise and experienced oineropoulos, who is able to read the signs and interpret the gods' messages. There is an ancient Hebraic phrase, quote, "A dream uninterpreted is like a letter left from God unopened." This is from the Bavli Berachot 5.5a. For this reason, there are some societies that choose not to open certain dream letters, like ominous or nightmarish dreams, since analyzing them may allow them to come into being. Quietly forgetting about these terrible dreams is considered by some societies as an option. I believe Jung would disagree. Dream interpretation, just like psychoanalysis, is itself a form of therapy. Therapeia from the Greek originally translates to serve or attend to, and by attending to the dream and unpacking and unfolding it, we are allowing its contents to assimilate into our waking consciousness in order to fully heal our psyche. There is a Mesopotamian poem called Dumuzi's Dream, about the shepherd god Dumuzi, which can illustrate the nature of dream analysis and its healing role. Quote, "The shepherd, Dumuzi, laid down in the south wind. To dream he lay down. He arose, it was a dream. He arose, he rubbed his eyes full of days. Bring my sister, bring my Gestinana, bring my sister. Bring my scribe who understands tablets, bring my sister. Bring my songstress who knows songs, bring my sister. Bring my little one who knows the heart of matters, bring my sister. I will report," and here he uses the word bur, "I will report my dream to her. In my dream, oh, my sister who knows dreams well, rushes were rising for me, rushes grew for me. One reed alone shook its head for me. Of two several reeds, one was removed." Gestinana responds, quote, "My brother, your dream is not favorable. It may not be removed." Again, use the word bur. Bocali, in his book Dreaming the World's Religions, notes that this dream is a symbolic prophecy of Dumuzi's impending death. The rest of the poem chronicled the shepherd god's vain attempts to escape his fate. Bocali notes importantly that the Sumerian word bur has a double meaning. The first meaning is to report or tell a dream, and the second meaning is a taking away or dissolving of the dream's evil contents. There is an ancient wisdom being conveyed here, and it would appear to suggest that the bringing to light of these dream messages are necessary for the healing and recovery of wounds, traumas, and evils. Several days ago, I posted a community poll comparing the philosophical underpinnings of English ghost story writer M.R. James with the work of Carl Gustav Jung in his psychoanalytic approach. The Englishman's stories seem to suggest the perils in discovering things lost and buried in time, and the dangers in unearthing them and exposing them to the present light. Comparing this to the psychoanalytic approach, which would seek to address these issues head-on and not shy away from them. At the time of this writing, 16% of respondents voted in favor of M.R. James's approach of letting the past's darkness and inherent traumas alone, lest something malignant be unearthed. And a resounding 84% fearlessly insisting on confronting the shadow and past traumas head-on for healing purposes. I am, however, rather sympathetic to both perspectives, and although I do believe in the necessity of confronting our traumas and shadows to properly individuate so that we may become fully integrated human beings, there is a caution to be exercised. As I mentioned in older videos, it has become rather banal to speak of shadow work. Too often people speak bravely of this type of knowledge, but such knowledge often comes at an incredibly high price. With all the sufferings and traumas attendant in a human life, knowledge of the shadow and the darker elements of the soul's accretions can very well destroy a comfortable or at least a complacent life. Most people are comfortable addressing little picadillos or minor character flaws, but truly seeking that knowledge will undoubtedly leave most people scarred, disfigured, and unrecognizable even to themselves. Paradoxically, it is through that disfigurement that results from such knowledge that true transformation and healing can occur on a fundamental way. Most of us have only just dipped our toes in. So I suppose, to conclude my reflections on the poll, there is a necessity to look within, but the danger and alarm felt by those who are too timid to look deeper is entirely justified. And too much bravado and empty heroic ideals are held by those who would bravely gaze into the abyss, not fully comprehending what the abyss gazing into you truly entails. One last point in Jung's psychoanalysis is his insistence on not only interpreting a single dream from a patient, but a series of dreams. Quote, "An obscure dream, taken in isolation, can hardly ever be interpreted with any certainty. For this reason I attach little importance to the interpretation of single dreams. A relative degree of certainty is reached only in the interpretation of a series of dreams. Also, the basic ideas and themes can be recognized much better in a dream series, and I therefore urge my patients to keep a careful record of their dreams and of the interpretations given." What this suggests to me is exactly the nature of the oneroi, manifesting as a multiplicity and as a fulon, or tribes, where each on their own are amorphous and opaque, but seen as a series or a collective, begin to coalesce into something that can solidify and show its true contours, and therefore provide interpretive data for more definite meaning. To conclude this video, I want to speak about the dangers of both psychoanalysis and dream interpretation, for these are two incredibly powerful tools that, as we will see, not only impact the psyche of the dreamer, but also impact the nature of politics and empires. Firstly, Jung highlights two ways in which a danger to the dreamer can emerge. The first is an over-reliance on dream interpretation, which would depotentiate the energy and will of the conscious. If it becomes one-sided, and the individual becomes too dependent on analyzing their dreams before making a decision, they may in fact impair their ability to do so. Quote, "Experience has shown me that a slight knowledge of dream psychology is apt to lead to an overrating of the unconscious, which impairs the power of conscious decision. The unconscious functions satisfactorily only when the conscious mind fulfills its tasks to the very limit. A dream may perhaps supply what is then lacking, or it may help us forward where our best efforts have failed." Another danger emerges when the psychoanalyst or the therapist has a very strong one-sided, a priori theoretical assumption as to the nature of the dream, or even the presentation of symptoms. Having preconceived ideas are dangerous for the patient because they rely solely on suggestion, which has its place, but can oftentimes lead to a prevention or cessation of healing. Quote, "In psychoanalytic therapy, if the doctor has a one-sided interpretation according to a preconceived opinion or theory, even though he actually may be correct in his diagnosis, this will result in an incorrect and potentially crippling outcome, because the point of therapy is not to have the truth inculcated into him. It has to reach the patient's heart and must go deeper within the psyche in order to enact transformation. The former is an example of suggestion. Quote, "The analyst who wishes to rule out conscious suggestion must therefore consider every dream interpretation invalid until such time as a formula is found which wins the assent of the patient." A misinterpretation of a dream can have terrible consequences for the patient's healing and further complicate a clinical neurosis. With respect to the political context, surprisingly, the ancient world has evidence of the power of dream interpretation and therefore suggestion over the minds of kings and the fate of empires. In the book Rabbis, Sorcerers, Kings, and Priests, the Culture of the Talmud in Ancient Iran, we find the Shah Shapur I, who had an avid thirst for foreign knowledge. His intention was to compile all Zand, Avestan, and non-Iranian scientific and philosophical thought into a single encyclopedia that supported a Zoroastrian imperial project. To this end, he also had his Sasanian scribes translate many ancient Greek texts. In the Talmud's dream book, in Bavli Berachot 55a to 57b, referred to earlier in this video, Shapur asks Rabbi Shmuel, quote, to predict what he will see in his dream that evening. Shmuel responds that the king will dream about his capture by the Romans and personal humiliation in being forced to be a pig herder. Predictably, the king thinks about these images, and later that night dreams about them. The scholar Mokhtarian says in, quote, this text Shapur is made to participate in his own domination through his inquiry into rabbinic wisdom about dream interpretation. He quotes a lengthy passage that, quote, invokes Shapur as a symbol of imperial authority in order to demonstrate the supremacy and efficacy of rabbinic knowledge over the fate of its rulers. There is a similar excerpt from the Berachot, where Shah Shapur is replaced by Caesar, asking the exact same question of the rabbis. Quote, tell me what I will see in my dream tonight. Rabbi Yehoshua replied to him, you will see the Persians come and seize you, and they will make you grind date stones in a golden mill. Caesar thought about this all day, and he saw it. Mokhtarian concludes that in this instance, the, quote, rabbis exert dream control over the monarchs, putting the idea of personal humiliation into their minds, and thus, as Rabbi Yonatan's theory claims, into their dreams. With their knowledge of dreams, the rabbis boldly and consciously cause their imperial others to endure terrible nightmares. Dream interpretation, and by implication its prophetic nature, is a form of power that the rabbis can use to transform the world. This is a perfect illustration of the power of suggestion. I want to end this video on a reflective note, something for you to take away and give some thought to. We spoke at length primarily about dreams that occur at night while we are asleep, but there are of course waking dreams, images and fantasies that come to us in our daily reveries. Sometimes perhaps these dreams come in the form of ideas that grab hold of us, as if we were bound by some strange compulsion or possession. According to the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze, quote, the dream of those who are dreaming concerns those who are not dreaming. Why does it concern them? Because as soon as someone else dreams, there is danger. Namely, people's dreams are always all-consuming and threaten to engulf us. And what other people dream is very dangerous, and the dream is a terrifying will to power, and each of us is more or less a victim of other people's dreams. Even when it's a graceful young woman, she's a horrific ravage, not through her soul, but through her dreams. Beware of the dreams of others, because if you are caught in their dream, you are done for. So you understand, when one has an idea like that, the idea really is not about knowing whether it is true or false. The question is about knowing if it's important, interesting, and if it is beautiful. The importance, perhaps, is not so much whether a dream, or idea for that matter, is false or true, but how it conforms to and interacts with the waking world around us, how it dictates and how it itself dictated by the forces that move our very being, and whether such dreams truly only live beyond the white rock near the land of the Cimmerians, or instead float around us, intimately clinging to our clothes, inhaled through our nostrils and entering our bodies, or hovering over our heads while we sleep, gently in the quiet slumber, belying mighty forces and explosive wills. Take care for now.